first, let me thank you for this experiential workshop, which was very good for me. And I do have certain questions, but I always have this curiosity about how a theoretician or a clinician came to this position. How did you make this possibility of combining both humanistic view and evocative view, if you allow me to put it this way?
Well, I thought you were going to say also, how do I combine it with a scientific view, because it's research-based. And I mean, I always think it's important to say that I have a master's degree in engineering before I changed into becoming a psychologist. So in some way I was trained in sort of science and observation, I think, before I came. So then I came in with already a different background. I came into psychology. And then basically I trained in client-centered, person-centered therapy, and I trained in Gestalt therapy. I also trained in some psychodynamic therapy, and I then trained for a year at MRI, Mental Research Institute, in systemic therapy. And then I was schooled in cognitive development a la Piaget. And I mean, those are all the things that I put together. And the evocative part came more from Gestalt therapy, the relational part from client-centered, and the theoretical part came from cognitive developmental Piagetian perspective. And I think my scientific perspective came from that. I was an engineer, and I trained with one of Rogers' students who was a psychotherapy process researcher, and I studied process, really observing moment by moment what happened to people in therapy.
My next question relates to in the workshop. Most of the time we spoke about these techniques, the two-chair technique and the unfinished business. But you said, and my ear was kind of, I heard it, that most of the time, at least in your students, 75% is more the empathic work. Right. And I wonder if I want my student to learn a little bit about your empathic work. How can they do it? Where can they get some knowledge about it?
Well, I mean, firstly, there is a 6-session DVD from APA called Therapy Over Time of me working with somebody. So there you see 6 sessions, and although I do more chair work in those 6 sessions than I would in a normal therapy, a lot of the time they're spent in more empathy type of work. So I mean, that's one way to do it, and in each of my videotapes that's available, there's some empathic work. Then there's a book called Learning Emotion-Focused Therapy. The first author is Robert Elliott. So that's a good way of, I mean, that was written to try to help students. It's very detailed. And there we talk a fair amount about empathy. I also co-edited a book called Empathy Reconsidered.
Which year was that?
In 1997. And then I have a chapter there on empathy. And one of my colleagues, Jean Watson, has written chapters on empathy. So these are ways that are explicating our approach to empathy.
You also, I asked you personally about the difficult for a therapist to move to the position of being a little bit evocative, to not only calming down, but to allow the negative emotion to. Could you elaborate a little bit about this?
I do feel that people have to work on themselves. So it's personal work. in Europe, they talk about training involves self-experience, and they require 150 hours of self-experience. I don't know what it's like here in Israel, but I think personal work is very important, and personal work on your own emotions. And the fundamental hypothesis is that it's important to not avoid emotions, and it's important to accept and allow emotional experience. And it's important to do more than just allow and accept it, and I talk about transforming it. But you have to do it yourself, for yourself, within yourself, as a way of helping you do that as a therapist. I also think it's a theoretical perspective on what is human nature, how do people change, and it goes beyond the simple learning theory, because in a learning theory you would say the more you do something, the more it increases, right? But this is more got to do with need, gratification perspectives and emotional processing perspectives, which are, the more you do it, the more it goes away. There's evidence now by a group, Lieberman et al., showing that naming an emotion leads to amygdala reduction in amygdala arousal. There's some human process by which putting a feeling into words changes the actual physiology. I think that's what some people have never believed in. So I think there's scientific evidence showing now that somehow naming emotions, facing emotions helps emotions change. So there's a theoretical belief, and it can be simplified by the only way out is through. Right? That makes sense, right? And I talk about you have to arrive at a place before you can leave it. So you have to really feel these bad feelings in order to change them.
And the last question. Apparently the world, the psychotherapy world, is divided to the two big camps, and your theory or your technique does not get enough attention yet. That's what I see. Maybe I'm wrong.
You're right.
Yeah. What's your explanation for this?
Well, I think it's that the humanistic movement sort of shot itself in the foot mainly by leaving academia and disavowing research, so that I think the human, and by being undisciplined, so that they stopped developing and producing. And so what remained in the universities and the intellectual areas were the two schools, and the humanistic school kind of disappeared, mainly because of lack of writing and lack of research. It was an experiential tradition, so it believed just do it and learn it. But you also need conceptualization and you need evidence. And so that's what we've been trying to do. A small group of us at York University is maintain this humanistic tradition but keep developing it. But I think that's why. So there isn't a home base of a large community of people who view themselves as humanistic. So somehow what I do has been assimilated quite strongly into cognitive behaviorism, and then psychodynamic remains much more insular, so they don't tend to assimilate things from outside.
Okay, I hope that this workshop in Israel might add some more force and more people into this, and thank you again.
I hope so. Thank you. Good.